Fill in the blanks with us. We're starting with we are adults. All right. In this classroom, we are adults. In this classroom, we are adults. In this classroom, we are adults. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Being an adult has to do with the choices we make, not how old we are. When I started teaching, my first year, I started teaching in Watts in South Central LA. When I was there, I taught 5th grade, and there was a student named Charlie who was more of an adult as a 5th grader than I was at that point in my life. His mom was addicted to methamphetamines and his dad was in jail. When he went home, he had to take care of his 2 baby brothers and sisters. However, Charlie also had straight A's. He did all his homework, he did well on his tests. I mean, I swear this guy was doing homework with one hand and feeding babies with the other hand. At that point in his life, Charlie was more of an adult than I was. I mean, I was fresh out of college. I was, 23 at the time? I don't think I could have survived Charlie's life. Right? I wasn't equipped to deal with those sort of hardships. So being an adult has nothing to do with your age. In this class, we'll do everything we can to learn what it means to be an adult. And I'll say things like, hey, no EMB, right? We learned that one. But I'll also say things like, can we be an adult, please? Or let's be adults. Or, another thing I'll do with like a check on this is, I think about, if I was in a meeting with the principal, would I be doing that? So for example, one year I had a student putting stickers on their face in the middle of class. Most teachers might ignore that. Right? I said, well, wait, I would not put stickers on my face at a meeting with the principal. That would look kind of weird, right? So can we be adults, please? Let's take those off your face. All right? When we're doing labs, we don't play around during labs, right? We're not little kids playing around. Now, that being said, if you're like, I might have a hard time with that, that's okay. I'm not going to hold it against you. I'll just slowly over time teach you what it is to be an adult. That also gives you the guarantee that I'm not going to treat you like a little child. The teacher may say, we are adults in here, if he sees you making a childish choice. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Jeff McAlpine, the 7th period teacher, and this is Classroom Culture 105, Marketed Messages. So I'm guessing you probably had some sort of reaction to my intro video, my message that we are adults in my classroom. And you're going to find out a little bit later that that's on purpose. The messages that I market in my classroom are designed to be a bit counterintuitive. They're designed to be sticky for kids so that kids will remember them. So marketed messages have really been at the core of my classroom culture for decades now. The origin of marketed messages really has to do with what I saw when I was observing teachers in classrooms. I would take pretty much all my preps, my first years of teaching, and I would go and I would just observe other teachers. And sometimes I would participate in their class. But I needed to discover, what works in a classroom. What I saw a lot of was teacher advice. I saw a lot of folksy advice. I saw a lot of teachers pausing and giving words of wisdom. Right? If you better be responsible now or it's going to come back to haunt you later. These things that anyone can kind of rattle off the top of their head as just general advice that adults give to kids. And what I noticed was that the teachers would never repeat the same advice twice. It would always be one piece of folksy wisdom one day and a new piece of folksy wisdom the next day. There was very little consistency to the message that teachers were sending. I also noticed that while those messages appealed to adults and to teachers, they rarely appealed to kids. Most kids, when listening to the teacher's advice, it would go in one ear and out the other. And so these messages that teachers were trying to send to their students, which they had great intentions, they had really positive intentions. They wanted to change the behavior of the student now and in the future, right? Their goal was really to help change the life trajectory of the student. But the way that most teachers went about it just didn't seem to impact kids at all. And so I decided that I wanted to dispense with the folksy wisdom and really use the tools that we know about marketing in order to design some really sticky messages that could change student behavior in the moment and for the rest of their life. And I knew that just like many commercials, it had to be something repetitious over and over again and something that would stick in their head. It couldn't just be something off the top of my head. It had to be something well designed. So far in my video series, you've seen several marketed messages. In Classroom Culture 103, I featured No EMB as the intro and the exit video. In one of the earlier videos, you also saw the message Loud and Proud and how I would sell that to students throughout the school year. In this one, you saw We Are Adults. And I'm going to go ahead and expand on these messages and how they're designed, where they came from. This is very much a persuader technique, but as always, I'm putting my analyzer spin to it, and so I'll show you how I developed these particular marketed messages. So just like the magnificent memorable moments from the last session, I've created an information sheet on marketed messages. It has a summary, a description, the why behind the technique. Now remember, in order for this to stick in teachers' minds and to use techniques in a school, you have to have practice, active coaching, and systematic support. So I have some tips for how you could go about that, and I'll go over those in a little bit. This is a coaching form, so it has that positive affirmations that a coach would write those in when they're in the classroom. And then it has a checklist on the back for how to implement marketed messages effectively. So what are marketed messages? They are messages that are carefully planned out. They are year-long campaigns. Okay, so they start at the beginning of the year and they work their way through to the end of the year. They're designed to be memorable or sticky, and not just memorable or sticky for adults, but memorable or sticky for students. And I'll expand on what I mean by the word sticky in a little bit. The campaign's designed to either bring about more of a positive behavior or to get rid of some sort of negative behavior in a classroom. And so this really is a positive way to go about behavioral change in a classroom, and I'll show you with some of my examples during this session about how this can actually change behavior in a classroom. So then the big why, right? As teachers, we're filled with personal advice and personal stories, but they just don't tend to have an impact on students. When we're delivering that folksy wisdom off the cuff, it's scattered, it's never consistent, it's not targeted, and it's not memorable. When you tell someone something they've heard 1,000 times, it goes in one ear and out the other. But if you design a very sticky message that they've heard for the first time and sticks with them, then there's a better chance of having a behavioral change because of it. And so you can design marketed message campaigns to add any sort of positive behaviors or get rid of some negative behaviors in a classroom. I'll show you some examples, but you can design campaigns of your own. So I always like to provide some context for where these ideas have come from. And this book here, Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, is all about how to make a message sticky so it sticks in people's minds. And so there are 6 principles, and you're going to notice that this technique of marketed messages uses all 6 of these principles. For example, the messages are going to be simple and profound, and things tend to stick when they're proverb-based or based on stories. They have to be specific and focused, and we stick with that over time with the same message over and over again. Principle 2, there's got to be some unexpectedness to it. You'll notice when I say we are adults, that's really unexpected. Students don't really think they're going to hear something like that out of the mouth of a teacher. It's got to violate their expectations in some way. If it's counterintuitive, then it tends to stick in people's minds, and it's got to grab people's attention. It's got to make them stop and go, huh? It's also got to be concrete. So we make this real through stories and through actual behaviors that you might see in a classroom. It can't be something nebulous like be kind. That can be very difficult and very nebulous unless you define exactly what that means. Principle 4, credibility. So you yourself have to be the expert in your marketed message. You have to believe in it wholeheartedly. You bring credibility to the marketed message for how you live your life and the stories you bring to the classroom. And so these have to mean something to you. It's got to be relatable, right? It also has to mean something to the student. And so stories where this message is developed through the stories of other students can help out a lot. It's got to be emotional in some way, right? There has to be some belief in the change, and it's really got to appeal to people and connect with them on an emotional level. And then finally, stories are a great way, narratives are a great way to communicate the marketed messages, and stories really bring marketed messages to life. All right, so let's take a look at We Are Adults. And let's take a look at how this marketed message was designed. Well, to have a marketed message, you need to have some sort of sticky title that's usually turned into a chant. Okay, and so me saying in this class, "We are," and students shouting out "adults" is the chant. And it's sticky, right? It's kind of an unexpected message. Now let me tell you a little secret. I know they're not adults. They know they're not adults. But it's about expectation, right? It's about, we are setting this expectation to be an adult level here, and then I'm going to explain to them what being an adult is all about. Because when we associate age with being an adult, that's problematic. Because there are a lot of adults in our lives that make childlike choices. Saying we are adults sets this level of behavioral expectation where we're going to strive for it and we're going to get there. Now, it has to be concrete, it has to address a behavior, and so another part of a marketed message is you have to clearly define concretely the behavior it's going to address. And in early middle school, when I first started teaching in 6th grade, 6th graders tend to have this constant state of neediness, right? I need this, I need this, I need this. There's also a sense in middle school and up into high school of sarcasm and obnoxious play. And I just didn't want those behaviors to take over in my classroom, right? I wanted my students to learn that, okay, we are at school, there's a sense of being at work when we're at school, and yeah, we're gonna have some fun and we're gonna enjoy it, but we're also going to be adults as we go about this. When you're designing your marketed message, sometimes it's a good idea to just start by making a list of, here's the behaviors that I want to see, here's the behaviors I don't want to see, and then see if you can't pick out some that you can turn into a marketed message to address. All right, once we have our behavior to address and our sticky title, there are certain ways we're going to communicate our marketed message to our students. Now, my favorite is to create a memorable experience. So for example, with the no EMB, what I did was, hey, I'm going to demonstrate EMB in my classroom. I'm going to fall over and I'm going to make them laugh at me, and I'm going to make them look at me in strange ways. I'm going to tell them I farted. And that memorable experience has actually added more and more throughout the years. And so to demonstrate no EMB, I give them a memorable experience that they don't forget. So in the past, a memorable experience I've done for We Are Adults is there's an inner lab in the classroom, and what I can do is I can do a quick change. And so what I do is I'll have shorts on and a backpack and a backwards hat and dress up like a student and come out and act one way, and then I go into the inner lab, I do a quick change and I'm in a suit, and I come out and I act a different way. And the idea is that I'm choosing to wear the suit, I'm choosing to change the way I'm acting, the words I'm saying. Anybody can make that choice to act in different ways. For no EMB, I use that every single year. For We Are Adults, I didn't use it the past couple years. It's a lot of work to do the quick change, and so I found that the stories are actually good enough for We Are Adults. And that's actually the most important part of a marketed message, a descriptive story, okay? And a decently long story. This is how you introduce your marketed message in your classroom. Okay, so there are 2 stories I tell to sell We Are Adults. The first one I talk about my dad and some childish choices he's made in his life. And I've embellished that story over the years. And my dad, he knew before he passed away. Like, Dad, I'm telling these stories, I'm sorry. Like, here's the thing, it's not all true, but a lot of students can relate to this when one of their family members is not making great choices, and he laughed about it, and we had a good time just talking about how it's being used to change students' lives. So he didn't mind it. The second story I tell is the Charlie story, which is actually a 100% true story. That one's not embellished at all. There was a student named Charlie, and he was actually in a really, really bad circumstance at home, but he was taking care of his brothers and sisters and doing well in school. And I'm not sure whatever happened to Charlie, to be absolutely honest. When I moved to Las Vegas to teach, I sort of lost track. There's always little tweaks to stories as well. Even though that's a true story, Charlie was actually an 8th grader, and I make Charlie a 5th grader in the story because I want students to think of Charlie as younger than them. And so, oh wow, if a 5th grader can act like an adult, then as a 7th grader I should be able to act like an adult. So you can tweak the stories a little bit, you can embellish them a little bit. You got to try to create this descriptive imagery in your story that appeals to students and that they'll remember. And that's the crazy thing about these stories is they might not remember the concept that I'm teaching one day, but months from now, they're going to remember the story of Charlie. Right? It's just this very sticky story that is emotional and sticks in their minds. So I'm always surprised by the number of students that can just retell my story almost perfectly months down the road. It's a great way to introduce your marketing messages. Now, there are also little short stories, little short quips that you can add on as well. For example, the short stories that I like to provide for We Are Adults is, does anyone have a family member that's older but still makes kid-like choices, right? And so occasionally we'll share that in our journals. Here's a choice that a family member made or a friend made. They're older, but this was a childish choice. You don't want to give too many stories. You want to limit it. I only tell 2 long stories and a couple short stories with my marketed messages, and then I'll repeat them throughout the school year. Now, one thing that I've developed is integrating the marketed message into the learning, and there's many different ways to do that. For example, We Are Adults, there's some great TED Talks on there with little kids, elementary kids that have done amazing things in their life, like student inventors, and so that relates to science, and I can show those videos, and it relates to the idea that we can be adults based on the choices we're made. And so I'll give you some more ideas how to integrate these into your learning later. Next, we use marketed message in a behavioral intervention sort of way. It's a new tool in your toolbox for behavior intervention. And actually the next video I'm going to go into is the manager side, and I'll talk about intervention of behavior. This particular technique, using marketed messages to intervene in behavior, is a pretty positive, good way to prevent behavior or to promote behavior. And so if a student is doing something that's childish in the classroom, my behavioral intervention phrase is, can we be adults, please? And usually that corrects the behavior very quickly. A second way I use this as a behavioral intervention, which is a little bit longer, would be if I was at a meeting with the principal. Right? Those words just come right off my tongue. If I was at a meeting with the principal, would I be putting stickers on my face during class? Can we be adults, please? So you'll notice I've turned my story, I've turned my marketed message into some sort of back pocket behavioral interventions that I can bring out to promote positive behavior and to take negative behavior to extinction. All marketed messages have to have a very quick behavioral intervention so that it can actually change the behavior in a classroom in the moment. And then finally, it's got to be posted in your classroom, and it's got to be repeated. You need to use it throughout the whole school year. So I'm just going to take a moment to go through the checklist. Step 1 is all about the number of campaigns in the classroom. You don't want to have too many. 3 or 4 campaigns is good. More than 3 campaigns can tend to overload students. It's also important to post your marketed messages in a place where everyone can see it. Very important for your students, but also for you to remind yourself that you have these campaigns and you need to use them on a consistent basis. And I make all my posters in Publisher. You can print them out large and cut them and paste them together. And so all the posters that I use, I just make myself. Step 3 is all about scripting out and delivering those sticky stories, selling the marketed message throughout. And while that happens at the beginning of the year, if you're an instructional coach looking for this, you can always go and ask a student privately, tell me about No EMB. How did the teacher introduce it? And students will be able to remember those stories and tell you about it. And so that can be evidence for that. Number 4, the message has to be sticky. And so you can go back to those principles of stickiness and designing something that's unexpected and different versus, let's say my marketed message is, be respectful. It's not very sticky. It's not unexpected. In fact, kids tend to expect to hear that in a classroom, and so it's not going to work for you as a marketed message campaign. It's very important that it's designed to stick in the minds of kids, not just adults. I usually try to give 2 stories, 2 long stories per. One of those stories I tend to be teacher focused, and that gives me credibility. Okay, here's a story in my life. It'll teach you a little bit about me, but at the same time it's showing how this particular marketed message I believe in, right? And this story tells you why I believe in it. And then I always tell a story that's closely related to maybe the student's life. So here's a student that encountered this, and so this can also appeal to you as a student. So those 2 stories, a personal one and a student-based story, tend to work really well to sell marketing messages. Steps 5 and 6 are all about actually using the marketing message during class time for behavioral change. So promoting a positive behavior. For example, let's say I'm doing a marshmallow lab where we're building molecules and taking them apart and putting them back together for simulating reactions. Well, we front load that with We Are Adults. Okay, so as adults, what are some things that we would do? All right, what are some things that we would do to be responsible during this lab? Okay, so let's be adults during this lab. Now, on the flip side of that, it's okay to front load with things to try to stop negative things from happening, or seeing something negative happen in the classroom, using your marketed message to stop it. So for example, if we're using marshmallows and a student pops a marshmallow in their mouth, first of all, I go, ew, that's disgusting. And then I'll say, hey, we need to be adults. in this room. Or if a student takes a marshmallow and squishes it. Hey, let's be adults in this room, please. Okay, so it's a quick behavioral intervention. I can be proactive with it and front load, or I can wait until something happens and use my marketed message as a behavioral intervention. The greatest messages can change a student's life trajectory. My first marketed message my first year was no EMB. I really needed this in my classroom. Even before We Are Adults, before some of the others, like the college-bound one, which I'll talk about later on, no EMB was very important. Well, it was my fourth year of teaching, and I went to a leadership conference, and there was a student there that looked very familiar, and it was Sydney. And she was a student I had my first year, and she was the student class president at our high school. And she came up, she gave me a big old hug and said, Mr. Mac, guess what? I've no EMB'd my way all the way through high school. All these things I never would have done. I used to be so shy, but that no EMB is something that it's changed my life because, I never would have run for student president or given speeches. I was so shy, but I've thought of no EMB all the time and it's helped me out. I know that's just one anecdotal story, but you want to try to design messages that can have that potential impact on a student throughout their life. Step 8 is all about instructional integration, and this really depends on the content you're teaching. For example, you can include story problems that have that message in it. So if you're a math teacher, Jonathan wanted to demonstrate no EMB, so he got in front of the class for 10 minutes, and then he got in front of the class for 12 minutes, or this number of students made frowning faces, what percent of the class is it that caused EMB? So adding those in to your practice. Writing prompts are great. Students can always write about different marketed messages. So here's a particular scenario. Write about what it would mean to be an adult in this scenario. What choices would you make? In reading passages, any reading passages that you can ask questions to relate your marketed message to works well with that. And something like social studies, historical events or historical figures that can support that message, you can include those as well. So integrating this into your lessons is another great way to sell your marketed message throughout the school year. You'll notice 9 is definitely optional. Through collaboration, campaigns are utilized by several teachers. You gotta be really, really careful with this. You gotta have the right teachers at the right times to help with your message. If a teacher turns, let's say, We Are Adults into a compliance piece, we are adults, you're gonna be an adult, do it now. That destroys your message, right? These are designed to be positive messages. I don't throw these in students' faces in a negative, horrible way. In fact, marketed messages are a great way to do behavioral intervention in a more positive way. And so you need to make sure that you include teachers that understand and believe in the message and understand the point and purpose behind it. And so if you, let's say as an administrator, force an entire school to do one marketed message, and there's a couple of teachers that don't believe in it, it could destroy it for everyone else. There's a lot of amazing charter schools out there that they use marketed messages in their own way, and every teacher does it in the same way, and they all believe in those messages, and that changes the culture of a school. Collaborating and using messages school-wide is an amazing, wonderful thing because you can reinforce for each other, but it's got to be done right. Belief is essential. Everyone has to believe in it. Otherwise, if everyone uses it, it could potentially hurt that message. And then the last one, and this is optional, you've taken a marketed message campaign that someone else designed and you stole it and you're using it for your own. So for example, you're using No EMB or We Are Adults. I've got a couple other campaigns I'll talk about throughout the rest of these sessions. Like If It's Boring, It's Important is another one that I try to sell. And the College Bound campaign is huge for me. And I'm gonna actually have an entire episode coming up here on how to persuade students with a College Bound campaign. So to practice this, you could start by listing behaviors that are negative in a classroom, picking a behavior, we're like, I'm gonna get rid of that behavior, and then trying to design a message yourself around that. So designing the long stories, designing the chants. I've done PD sessions where all the teachers in the room, we spent a couple hours designing our own marketed messages and practicing them in front of each other. And there's been some amazing marketed messages that people have come up with over the years. But the key is to try to get it to be as sticky as possible. And it's not easy to come up with something that's original and can stick in students' minds. And remember, when you're designing stories, you can embellish them. They don't necessarily have to be true. I like to have a little bit of the story at least in truth, because then it's easier to communicate that to students and have them believe my story. But I embellish so that it's more memorable for students. Once you have that behavior and you have an idea for it, you script out your stories and then you practice them in front of family, friends, other teachers, get feedback, practice it again. in terms of practicing, it starts with a lot of planning. I think it's really essential that you practice your stories ahead of time before you're in the classroom. The more times you tell the stories, the more believable the story ends up being. If I'm designing a new marketing messaging campaign, I'm definitely going to rehearse the stories in front of my wife over and over and over again and get feedback and improve on that, or in front of other teachers. So before you implement these, please practice ahead of time to make sure that your stories stick in students' minds and that the marketing message you designed really is sticky. Getting other people's opinions about that can be really, really important. Now, if you're actively coaching someone on marketed messages, then you would need to schedule at the beginning of the school year to come in and watch their stories. This works really well in secondary schools that have multiple class periods. So let's say you go observe first period, they tell their story, then you give them some feedback. Here's what you should do to make this better. And then you come back second period and you watch them give it again. And you can even have them reinforce this partway through the year. Or if you want to sit down with a teacher and have them plan out a story and then give them advice on the story, right? You can always coach them on their planning ahead of time as well. Another great way to coach this is going into a classroom and watching for moments in the classroom where the marketing message could be used, and then giving them feedback on, hey, this happened here, let's address this with the marketing message. So you watch, you see behavior not addressed, then you talk to the teacher, okay, let's address it, here's what I want you to do, and then they go and they address that behavior, and they kind of backtrack, hey, I saw this happen, let's remember our marketed message. Okay, so those are some active coaching suggestions. Systematic support for this, there's many different ways you could support as a building administrator. You could have teachers videotape their message and share them with staff. Teachers could come up with stories of their own for the messages that other teachers design. You could have a classroom full of teachers designing no EMB stories from their own lives. Okay, so that's a systematic way to support marketed messages. Now, you could also, as an administrator, have a school-wide marketed message for adults, right? And then use the same exact stories and the way of selling that marketed message throughout the whole school year. But in that case, be really transparent with the teachers. This is my marketed messaging campaign. Here's my intent of it. Here's what I want to happen. And even if you're upfront with it and they know exactly what you're doing, the marketing message campaign can still have an impact on your staff. And so systematic support, active coaching and practice, you put all that together and you should have some great marketing messages going on at your school. All right, I just kind of wanted to end this with a little bit of research. It's hard for something like marketing message to say research supports you should do this. It all depends on the message, right? What is the message promoting? And looking at some of John Hattie's research and remembering anything above a 0.4 is something that you want to use in a classroom or in a building to help students grow. Those are highly effective techniques. Self-efficacy is a big one. The students' beliefs in themselves and their ability to learn. And so if you design a marketed message to promote self-efficacy, that could potentially have an impact of a 0.92. Marketed messages bring teacher credibility. They really do. When I'm using a no EMB campaign in my classroom where we are adults, students see me as a credible source of, wow, this teacher really knows what they're doing, right? They've got this whole crazy campaign figured out. Oh my gosh, the first day of school, you'll never guess what Mr. Mack did. He's an incredible teacher. It brings you credibility up front in the school year, and it shows that you're going to be different. You're going to be someone different, and so that's a 0.90. Some marketing messages are used to motivate students, and that's a 0.69. Using these as behavioral interventions, right, that's a 0.62. And it simply means I see a behavior, I do something about it. Any marketed messages that develop cooperation between students can have an impact, the research says. Anything where students help each other out, have positive influences on each other. You could have campaigns that cause that to happen. Campaigns designed to bring your classroom together like a family. I love the word family. I've done a lot of messages that have the word family in it. And so that's a 0.44. And the idea is you're going to have expectations, right? We Are Adults sets high teacher expectations for students. And so We Are Adults aligns with that 0.43. We Are Adults also help students design that positive concept of themselves and their choices and who they can be. And then the no EMB, you'll notice when students feel disliked, that's a negative 0.9. It pulls them back on student achievement. And so having no EMB helps with that. So while I can't say marketed messages by itself is research backed that using this no EMB helps in your classroom, but I can say that if you design a really great marketed message to promote some of these amazing things like self-efficacy and strong classroom cohesion, it's really going to help you in a classroom, and it can align with the research. And this really is one of those techniques where I have to say anecdotally that this changes a classroom. It changes it significantly. And once you start using marketed messages, you're going to wonder, why did I give that folksy wisdom to begin with, right? It never really changed students' minds. Went in one ear and out the other. When you start using marketed messaging, you'll find that student behavior changes, and students actually start using these with each other. I tell you how many times students will turn to someone else and say, hey, no EMB, or let's be adults. And I love marketed messaging. It's a great way to be a persuader in a classroom and to represent something. I'm the no EMB guy. I'm the we are adults guy. And to students, that's what I represent. All right, that is our first persuader technique, our second technique of the series. Next time we meet, I'm going to go into assertiveness and some manager techniques where we intervene in behaviors and how to do that in a quick, efficient way. All right, folks, hope you enjoyed this. I love feedback. Feel free to write it in the comments below. Love to hear your feedback. And I hope you have a great week back at school, and I will talk to you soon.